All right, Christina, you ready? Here, are you gonna mess up our guest's name on purpose to get him back?
He did call me Christine, but only by email. I usually don't, vocally correct unless it's to my face. So it's okay.
Let's see.
So, hey everybody, welcome to the Going Out podcast, in which three board gamers bring a different game and topic to discuss. I'm your host, Christina, and we've known today's guest, Chris Matthew, for several years. First, as part of Panda Game Manufacturing on the game manufacturing side, making some really fantastic games. The parts of them, like everything is super high quality with Panda Game Manufacturing stuff, and he was there for 11 years, but now spinning off to create an indie publisher, Bellows Intent, and designing his first game, An Age Contrived, a strategic Euro-style engine-building game that balances resource programming and action combos with some amazing magnetic metal pieces, crazy components, magnetic pieces. So we're super excited to have Chris join us for the first time on our podcast. And he's got a really unique perspective, being both from behind the scenes in the past and now in pretty much designing a game in front of everything, trying to have a brand new publisher be successful. We had a great Kickstarter with An Age Contrived, and we're excited to have him on. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Christina. Hi, Shu.
Hey.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you guys for having me.
You said his name right.
I did. It's hard for me to purposefully do that.
I've actually said your name wrong before. I called you Chris Matthews once and added an S, but I've learned since.
So we are excited to have you here. You've got a brand new company. Very excited for that. And I think another upcoming Kickstarter too. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Following the release of this first game, An Age Contrived, it just made a lot of sense to put out an expansion for it that would have a lot of ideas that really didn't belong in the base game, given that I had to cap the complexity somewhere. And I mean, even capping it somewhere, it did get pretty complex. But there are a lot of really good ideas that that came from playtesters to a large extent. So yeah, second project on the way is going to be an expansion called Folklore and Pilgrimage, and that'll be coming to Kickstarter in February 2025.
It's very exciting, very exciting. And we ask our guests to bring a topic for us to discuss today. So what's your topic for us today?
My topic today is how games can surprise and delight us.
Okay. Well, we have a lot of stories about that because with me today, of course, is Shu. Hi, Shu.
Hello. Well,
he's always upset that I forget to mention him, but you've been here the whole time. Everybody
I guess it's a good thing you kind of talk about our guests first.
Yeah.
Because they're more important than I am.
So egotistical. Wants to be announced first before our special guest. But anyway.
I just don't want to be forgotten like you sometimes do.
You're sitting right next to me. So what topic are we going to be discussing today?
So one of the things, and we'll talk a little bit more about this during the show, is how crazy produced An Age Contrived is. It's like you just can't believe it. And every time I touch it or I'm opening it or setting up the game.
He touches it a lot too. I don't know.
I'm always touching her game. And it's just, I don't know how you make money on such a game with what you put into this. So my topic is how do game makers sort of balance making cool and sometimes expensive components and balancing that with the budget, the cost, the price of the product, and so on. I'd like to get more insight, especially because Chris came from Panda, from the manufacturing side at Panda, and now he's a publisher. So I think I just want to ask him a bunch of questions about how companies and designers and publishers kind of figured this stuff out.
We also like to start things off by highlighting some recent games or just games that we loved and asking our guests to talk up one during our icebreaker. So we wanted to talk about Open Season, a new release from Sit Down Games designed by Amelie Assier and Roman Lisiandro.
That sounds pretty good.
I mean, that sounded close, I hope. So thanks to the Flat River Group for providing us with a media copy. And why don't you tell us about this game, Shu?
So this is a game we first saw at Gen Con 2 years ago. 2 Gen Cons ago. So yeah, 2023. Well, last year.
Okay.
2 Gen Cons ago.
Okay.
And then they demoed to us. I'm like, this is such a neat idea. And the concept, the theme is that we're bad guys and we're
monsters.
Yeah, we're monsters and we're taking the heads of adventurers to put up on our trophy wall, and you're collecting different heads. So basically a turn goes, you're going to have this market of 5 cards in the middle. They're just basically different heads, which will be sort of their suit. Like like the trolls are a suit or the barbarians are a suit, for example. And they all have different symbols. Like some of them are like, one might have a symbol for jewelry, and in the art you'll see that they have jewelry on, and that's kind of like what you're collecting. I want a head with jewelry, or I want a head with the tattoos or something like that. So you draft 2 of them, and then one of them you have to place onto your wall, and then depending on where you put the wall, they'll score differently. So you might be saying this type of card, like a troll, for example, is going to be worth 3 points for every one I've collected on the side by the end of the game. Or another spot is actually, this is going to be worth negative points by the end of the game. Another spot might be like, hey, these will trigger certain powers when I collect more of these. So you're kind of doing 2 collections, one for your wall, one for the side collection at the same time. And then they both work together. And then so I really like this game. I think I liked it more than you for sure, Christina. Like you weren't quite as enthusiastic about it,
It's
right?
fun.
Yeah.
I think it had some fun. It's like basically just like a how do I want to score things sort of game. So it had some fun decisions and stuff like that. I thought it was a sort of goofy art, and it sort of fit with that theme because you're collecting adventurers' heads and stuff like that. So it was fun.
Yeah,
And I think you liked it more.
Yeah, I really like the, like, oh man, can I get the cards to come up at the right time? You're drafting them, and then you have to place them. So you have 11 spots on your wall, and each one can only take 1 card. So you have to do it perfectly. So if you wait to the end, and you might accidentally like, oh no, now I only left the negative one left, and then now I have to put a card there, and I'm putting a card there that I don't want to put in. So you have to really balance when you put things where, and then there's certain collections within the walls. Like if you can line up these 3, you'll get an extra bonus that will give you extra turns or extra actions. And then there's other things you could do, like I could trigger this card that will let me steal the top card from Chris's side deck, for example. And then, but it doesn't feel too terrible because Chris will also get another extra card as compensation for that. So at the end, everyone has this wall that you can see what everyone's building, and you have another pile, another collection on the side, and then you're like looking through these cards, and you're like, am I optimizing my score? You know, I'm going to get the most. If I have the most dwarves, I might get a bonus. If I have this card, I might get 3 points per troll and all that kind of stuff. So there's just a lot of different ways to kind of set this up, but it's pretty fast moving. Like you just draw 2 cards. One goes on the wall, one goes in your collection. And then 11 turns, and then everyone's done, and everyone's counting up their points. And it's to me, it's like really rewarding kind of scoring engine game. And it's like you could play it in probably 30, 40 minutes.
Yeah,
So,
really nice little filler.
yeah.
So.
And I don't see a ton. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, thanks. Is it the case then that if you're drafting certain types of monster heads and like allocating them into different scoring locations, that then you're like seeking more of that head if that's like the really valuable location, or how does that?
Yeah, it's possible. Like for example, if I put my barbarian or my sorcerer on the, hey, I want these to score, I think it's 3 points. It's 3 or 2 or 3 points as the highest one. There's that option. Now I'm going to be seeking a lot of those. But if I also put a sorcerer on the -1 per card, I think that I've kind of almost kind of canceled out some of the bonuses I'm going to get. And then at the same time, if I have a sorcerer up top where we trigger different powers, I might want sorcerers to play to instead to use to steal cards or to reserve cards or things like that, or to draw extra cards and stuff like that. So there's a lot of different choices you can make, but none of them it's not too complicated of a game. It's pretty, like I would say, on the light side of medium, but a short game. Again, under an hour, you could easily play it. But yeah, you have to make decisions constantly about like, ooh, do I want to save this guy for this? Do I want to score him a lot? Or do I want to really go all in and have to try to claim the most of this particular adventurer by the end of the game and such? And one of the reasons I wanted to bring it up in the show was because I'm like, I don't really see anyone talking about this game. I thought it was cool when I just heard the concept and saw it kind of demoed and not having played it. I was like, that game's really neat. And then we requested a media copy, and like, this is as fun as I initially thought. And I've been trying to show people and kind of evangelize a little bit because it is just such a fun little game to me.
She really likes collecting heads. That's all.
Yeah,
Cool.
yeah.
I hadn't heard about it before this. I'm going to check it out.
Yeah, that's open season.
Mm-hmm. And what game did you bring for us, Chris?
Today I brought Revive, which is a game that I think is maybe 2 years old now, although it doesn't seem like it. It is a Euro-style game, and it's about medium weight. So for my group anyways, it takes around 2 hours for us to play like a 3 or 4 player game. The backdrop of this game is that we are 5,000 years in the future, and we are post some sort of apocalyptic event on Earth. And after that event, humanity kind of went underground. And we've been living it out underground, kind of waiting, as far as I understand it, for the surface of the world to become somewhat habitable again. Okay. And the game is set at that time where we are able to emerge and kind of revive the Earth. And that's why the game is called Revive. And this game, it doesn't do anything that is especially innovative or that is kind of like one hook that really just lets you sell the game to your friends. But I find that it does everything it does extremely well. And it takes concepts that are used in a lot of popular games that we are familiar with, and it just executes them in a way that's really satisfying. So a couple of those things that it does are it has some exploration. So everyone starts with a little settlement in the middle of the map that they're exploring from. And then there's a wide open icy map that you are trying to go and kind of like revive the Earth, like transform this ice into habitable land again, and then put your settlers on it and put your buildings on it. This is something that, I mean, for me, there are other games where, a game that comes to mind is Concordia, where everyone starts in the center and they're kind of picking a path and then venturing outwards and building a bit of a network, some infrastructure. And it does that. It does it really well. You get this nice visual progression where you start with this blank icy map, and by the end of the game, you know, it's very populated. It's a bit more colorful. It's got this structure where you can do 2 actions on your turn, which is something that I think a lot of games have. You know, games that come to mind for me where you get 2 actions are games like Brass or Terraforming Mars, where maybe the first action you're trying to get resources and the second action you're trying to do something with those, or maybe there's a more efficient way you can do it. It also gives you some bonus actions that are free you can take on top of those 2, which let you kind of break the game's rules or circumnavigate the game's restrictions in some cool ways. Kind of that reminded me a little bit of a game like Marco Polo, which is a game that gives you camels as one of the resources, and you can spend those camels to manipulate some of the dice that you're rolling in certain ways. So just kind of another little callback there that I thought was cool and done in a really interesting way. And the last thing that I'll say about it for now, that is actually like something I haven't seen in any other game before, is these spiral tracks that each player has on their character board. So I'm going to try to describe this for our listeners here. Imagine a spiral with 3 lines coming out from the middle. And as each of those 3 lines curves, it comes into contact with the line next to it. And in this game, each of those lines is a track with spaces. And as you advance a certain distance up each track, your markers reach those contact points with the other lines. And as you do that, it gives you benefits in the game that will build your engine or your scoring in one way or another. And it's hard to describe in words, but visually and kind of just in this puzzle of your player board, it just works really well. So I've been returning to this game and just super impressed by it the last couple of years.
Okay.
I've heard of this game, but just sort of in name, and I didn't really know what it's about. And then when you mentioned before the show that you wanted to talk about Revive, I looked it up again, or I think you sent us the Board Game Geek listing, and I'm like, whoa, this game's ranked really high. It's like overall ranked 104, which is amazing on Board Game Geek, and then strategy ranked number 63 overall. So all games on Board Game Geek. So this is every board game possible. So
how did we not know about this shit?
I know, we need to check it out. So that
Chris
sounds really
knows all the
interesting.
cool stuff. So you know, we'll have to see if we can get a copy or borrow somebody's copy. So, and you know, as our listeners know, we've been talking about Magic Mind mental performance shots before. We finally got a monthly subscription a few months ago, so now we always have some on hand. It's been great. They're full of natural ingredients to boost our energy and brain power. Before, we used to drink these with our daily coffee to extend the energy we get, but now more and more we find ourselves just drinking Magic Mind on its own.
Yeah, I was like, lately, I'm like, I don't need coffee so much. Sometimes coffee's a bit much, but so the Magic Mind's been kind of great for that. Just this past Friday, as some listeners might know, and Christine knows very well, I get really, really sleepy when I read game rules. I actually use reading and learning games as a way to fall asleep.
Yeah.
So it's like that. I could just read 2 paragraphs and all of a sudden I'm just like, oh my God, I can't keep my eyes open. So Friday, I unintentionally fell asleep, and next thing I knew,
reading a party game.
It was a party game rule book. It was just a couple of pages too. It wasn't like an Age Contrived rule book or something. And then so the next thing I knew, Christina was trying to wake me up. She's like, hey, it's almost 7 o'clock. People are like, oh my God, people are coming over in 10 minutes and I've been sleeping. I'm not ready. I needed to get dressed and freshen up. So I was so groggy and out of it. I immediately went downstairs and took a shot of Magic Mind because I wasn't about to have a cup of coffee at 7 p.m. So the Magic Mind was perfect. It knocked out that grogginess and it gave me a steady level of energy without the jitters. So I went from a muddy brain to just being able to play 5 hours worth of games with our friends. I think we played Rabble, Sync, Flip 7, Chronologic, The Gang, Sears Catalog. So we played a bunch of different games that we had to teach and run and kind of host and then entertain people, and it worked out great. So, by the way, quick side note, we're going to be doing a roundup of all these party games in a couple of episodes, so make sure you stay tuned for that.
And if you're interested in trying it out, Magic Mind was kind enough to sponsor Going Analog again and is offering our listeners up to 48% off. Just go to magicmind.com/analog20 and use the promo code analog20 to save almost half off. So yeah, give it a try. Back to the meat of our podcast. Let's start with our topic, Shu. What was our topic?
Okay, so let Chris set up what Age Contrived is a little bit more. But then I want to talk about the components. So don't talk about the components, Chris. Just give us a quick elevator pitch of what An Age Contrived is from a gameplay perspective.
Sure, okay. An Age Contrived is a fantasy Euro game of engine building and resource programming. So when I say those words, what I mean is with a Euro game, we're competing to score the most points, but we're not fighting each other directly, and there's not a lot of luck involved. And an engine building game, what I mean by that is basically that your abilities at the end of the game are going to be far more powerful than your abilities at the start of the game. There's kind of this ramp up in your power level from the beginning to the end. Now, resource programming, that's something that is maybe a little bit less commonly known. Basically, what I mean by that is you're going to be kind of looking at the board and saying like, oh, I want to accomplish this. But it might take you 1, 2, 3 turns to build up to that, and you're going to need some resources to do that. So you're going to be slotting in some resources in some spaces where you'll have to wait a few turns for those to be accessible to you. But that planning out what you want to do in the future is part of the game. Each of us plays as a god in this fantasy pantheon, and we're trying to build up a mortal world because we as gods are only as powerful as the mortals believe we are. And we do that largely through the construction of these monuments that exist on the board. So that's a little bit of setup. Shu, I'll pass it back to you.
Okay, yeah. So I wanted to give listeners and viewers the context for what the game is, right? Because that's ultimately the most important thing. All right, so now onto our topic, which is how do game makers balance making cool and probably maybe expensive components versus their balancing cost against cost, price, and budget. So let me describe to listeners what you're getting in Age Contrived. And we're talking about the set we have. The set you sent us, Chris, is the designer edition, is that, or the Kickstarter edition?
I think it's called the Founders Edition.
Founders Edition, that's right. Yeah, so it's a bigger box. It's a heftier box. And then the programming part that Chris talked about, which is like, okay, now you're setting up, you have 5 columns of actions. And then you have these energy little tiles that you're placing within them. And then depending on what you want to pull will trigger different actions and things like that. And then you could also there's another move you could do, which is advance it. So you slide these tiles, these 5 columns of tiles down 1 or 2 spaces to the right. And then it's kind of like a conveyor belt. So the ones at the end fall off and then you put in new ones, and then you're slotting in, and they might have different positions for these energy tiles and such. So describing this, the tiles are like these nice, kind of like if you're familiar with the game Azul, there's these like really nice, what is that material called anyways? Like, what are those tiles made out of?
The type of plastic is called AS. I'd have to look up. I'm sure a quick Google search would remind me what AS stands for.
That's okay. They're nice chunky tiles, right? They have printing on them. They're nice and chunky. And then now in the nicer version of this game, you get the upgraded a tray that holds the conveyor belt itself is metal, like not a light kind of aluminum or something. It's like heavy duty metal. And then so all those little cardboard tiles will slide through again. There's a nice slot for them. And then there's a little spring-loaded sort of mechanic that you can use to kind of, if you pull the spring-loaded lever back, then the tiles will drop down. And then when you let go, it'll shoot them out the end of these things. And then on top of that, so this thing, there's like 5 of them for up to 5 players, 1 for each player. And it already looks, now I'm like, if I didn't know you, Chris, and I was a familiar with this game, I'm already getting into like, is this necessary? This is so over the top. It's so extravagant. On top of that, you give stickers to the players to deck these things out so they don't just look like black masses of metal with springs and levers. You make it look thematic to the different factions and the different gods. So one might be really dark with feathers for this one god that looks like a crow. Another one's more flamey and orange and bright red for a dragon faction or dragon god. But you give everyone 2 sets of stickers so you can decide which style for each god. So like, I think like for one quick example, the tree god, there's one that's a little bit more where all the stickers and the design and the background's more leafy. The other one's a little bit more branchy in style. And you pick one and then just like, it doesn't matter. It has no gameplay implications. You could just sort of customize these metal pieces like that. And then you have this board that has these slots in them, and then you put these little metal brackets underneath the board and they stick up. So at first, when you're first starting the game, it looks kind of unsightly because there's just little metal brackets sticking out everywhere. But then you're building these shrines or the monuments, and then these are cardboard, but they're embedded with magnets. So they attach to these brackets, and eventually you build a 3D little model. So there's these little monuments around the board that are all like thick cardboard, magnetic pieces and everything. And then there's a bunch of other little pieces that slot into different areas perfectly and really nicely. And it's just, it's so crazy and over the top, Chris. It's like the best produced game I think I've ever seen. Like I've never seen anything like that tray, the metal tray. I've never.
That's the Founders Edition, but even the sort of normal retail edition still has the monuments too, which is
the monuments are part of every game, right? That's the magnetic shrines, and then they just snap right into place, and they make a little 3D building or like a boat, something like that. So there's a few different monuments depending on the player count and all that kind of stuff. And so I'm looking at this like the extra stickers. And then you have these really nice game trays, like the thick plastic kinds that snap really nicely. They're very sturdy. They could probably hold, my weight if I were to stand on these things. Just everything's really nice. And it didn't feel like you skimped on anything, except like there's a bunch of loose bits at the end that you just put into one bag. And then, so we 3D printed, we have a 3D printer, so we 3D printed someone's design to have an extra tray just to kind of organize those things. But that's about it. And it's just kind of insane to me how this game, like, can you make money on this thing? Like kind of tell us, like, I know, you coming from the manufacturing side, obviously you have a lot of ideas about things you probably want to make or you want to try and things that we haven't seen in board games before. But how do you go about trying to figure out, like, how do I make this luxury, top end, great for the players? Like, I want everything feel good, to look good. How do you balance that versus, okay, at some point, someone's going to have to pay for this and get this manufactured, and you have to put a price tag on this thing that players
spent like 30 minutes just like orgasming. Sorry, everybody. Chris. We did have a question for you. Yes.
Yeah. So Chris, I would love to hear more from your side. Like, how does something like this get made?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll speak to some of the bits that are new in board games, at least as far as I know, first, because there's some stuff that people that we're familiar with as board gamers, right? Like there's a bunch of nice cardboard. Now I obviously went for like the nicest version of that and, tried to get like all the right thicknesses and finishes that I think work well in games generally. And then those kind of Azul inspired tiles, those are something that we've seen in Azul, of course. Like I think a lot of people have played Azul, this game where we're building these kind of like Portuguese tile walls.
Mosaics.
Yeah, super lovely game and beautiful. And those, when I looked into them, because I also like not knowing anything about the production of those particular tiles, but having that as something that I might want to use in a game, and I started looking into it. I learned that they're not; those are not as expensive as you might think they are. And I think one thing that anyone can kind of do is like look at a game that they think has nice components and kind of see like, well, where can I buy that game and how much can I buy it for? So if I could buy Azul at Target, let's say, and I don't actually know how much Azul sells for these days. I know I bought it for 50 Canadian dollars a few years back. And then, in the industry, there's some kind of standard markups that are applied. So a game that you might spend $50 for, it might cost anywhere from $5 to $10 to produce and put that on the shelf. And then if you kind of like look at the componentry involved in that game, and you can pretty quickly get a rough idea of how much things cost. Now, I was pleasantly surprised that those tiles are not as expensive as I was expecting. I was prepared to use something else, but that worked out. That was pretty good. That was not a huge portion of the production budget. Those metal components going into the game, I really had no idea about. Shu, you mentioned kind of inspiration to try new ideas in games, which is very much what motivates me. And where the inspiration for some metal components came from was IKEA furniture. At our apartment, my wife bought like a little side table that was metal, and she spent $10 on it. And I assembled the thing, like it had to go in a corner somewhere. I think maybe we had to put a plant on it or something. And I was like, this thing that we spent $10 on, it's like super sturdy. There's a bunch of parts to it. And like somehow IKEA makes money on this. And what that got me thinking is like, well, I've never seen this sort of like, it's sheet metal, this particular type of production, which is basically where you've got like a flat sheet of metal and then you cut that and you bend it in certain ways and you might make something like a piece of IKEA furniture that then people need to assemble and screw together in the end. So I started looking into that production and experimenting and reaching out to manufacturers with some of initial designs that I made. And I quickly learned that like, yeah, this, IKEA can make a piece like that and sell it for $10 and make money. So then I just started asking like, well, are there any applications in board games that might be interesting for that? That might be something new that we haven't seen before. And then, there were some dead ends that I ran into, some other components that I wanted to put into this game. But when I started researching those, I found that like, oh no, this is not feasible at all. This is way too expensive. It just so happened that this sheet metal production was something that worked out. I think publishers haven't put in games before just because of a lack of knowledge and awareness. So I thought, well, why don't I try to, answer some of those questions and see if I can come up with a use case in terms of gameplay and in terms of components and trying to marry all those things together that makes for a somewhat satisfying experience. So that's how it started and kind of like at a high level how it went.
So the research into the metal came first before you actually had an idea of what to actually do with it in the game?
It came very quickly after the initial game concept. So the first concept for the game was there's a popular game called Tzolk'in, the Mayan calendar, where it's a game where there's like a network of gears in the middle of the table, and as you turn one central gear, it through its teeth turns 5 other outer gears. And it's a game that I really love.
I love that game.
Yeah, it's super good. And I was inspired by that. There was a question that I asked myself, which is like, what if each player had one of those outer gears as something that was completely upgradable as a personal player board? And rather than giving each player a gear, I quickly determined that like maybe a better form factor would be a conveyor belt, like Shu you mentioned, is like the core way that An Age Contrived runs. And then I started asking like, okay, well, with a conveyor belt, one thing that's really important is a super smooth rail system. And it was through asking myself like, well, how would I make that work, that I arrived at this sheet metal as something that might be an option. I also looked into plastic, which I think is would have been a little bit more obvious choice. But it just so happened that metal worked out to be a little better, a little more interesting, a little more cost-effective as well. We could have done cardboard as well, just a simple dual-layered cardboard player mat, and that would have been perfectly fine. My concern there was just having two cardboard edges rub against each other over time, and then wear and tear over time is something that I wouldn't have been super happy with.
Interesting.
Okay, so you talked about the metal, you talked about the plastic, things like that, and then but you're also doing things like I didn't even mention in the Founders Edition. What you offered was like individual numbers, and then people could go and customize the inside box lid. You could pick a design and then have your name or a saying, I think you could put in there. And so you actually created a website for the founder backers to go input this stuff. And then this way your inside box lid is customized to yourself as well.
It's all like pictures of my face. So
I don't think you can't add images, just text. And then you pick a design, a preset design that they have already. But again, like with the options for every god has 2 different kind of art styles, and you can pick which set of stickers you want. It did feel like, because I'm always hearing from other game publishers that like they're trying to figure out how to cut costs, right, and how to produce less. And you're like adding extra unnecessary stickers just for the collection. This is like the metal frames for the conveyor belt stuff. Those took a little bit of time. You have a how-to video on your website to explain how to put these together, and it takes a few steps. It's not too hard, but it's not a 5-minute thing for sure. And you got to be careful about how you put on the stickers because they're going to stay there wherever you place them and things like that. But it does feel like you didn't kind of follow the path that most game publishers are like. How do we trim costs? How do we make this a little bit cheaper? You're just like, here's twice as many stickers as what you need. You're going to throw half of them out. It's just so you could pick the background of one of the things that you like. Here's this back of the lid thing that most people, they'll look at once as like, that's kind of cool. And then maybe they won't look at it again. It's just like a lot of little things has to cost you money at some point. So how do you get to figuring out like, this is worth it. It's going to cost me a few more cents here, a few more cents here. And I'm going to have to charge a lot more for the Founders Edition, but it's worth it to me. Like, how do you kind of make those decisions in your head?
Yeah, I think that a lot of it has to do with the business model that a given company is running and what their economics look like. So, you're speaking to me. I'm a single, I'm a one-person publisher over here, right? Like, it's just me. I've got a team of contractors who help with like all of the artwork, the graphic design, the sculpting, game development, the solo mode, like all of these areas where it requires expertise beyond what I can do to make a polished professional game. But beyond that, like the only person on staff is myself, and I'm selling direct to consumer. Most of the money that I've made so far has been through selling on Kickstarter. And I think that fundamentally is just different from what a lot of the bigger companies have to deal with, where probably most of their revenue comes from a distributor that will buy games from the publisher at like a high percentage off of the manufacturing price. So if I'm selling Azul to a distributor and Azul sells at retail for $50 as the publisher, I might only get $20 for that, right? Whereas me as Chris, as Bellows Intent, if I sell a copy of An Age Contrived for $100 on my website, like I get, after I pay for shipping, I might get like $60 of that. Like I just get to keep a lot more of that. And I think that there are some companies out there that have really tried to embrace a direct-to-consumer business model. Companies like Orange Nebula and Ivy Studios and Chip Theory Games are all ones that come to mind that do a really great job with this. And I think it's difficult to make that work. And kind of once you're on a path, I think it's also very difficult to switch paths. Like I think that if you're a publisher who has been around for 20 years and you publish games and you have these strong distribution relationships, it will be hard to say like, well, we're going to switch to direct to consumer now. It's like a very different way to sell games. And that might be a really risky thing to do. And there might be no guarantee of success there. But starting off fresh, I have that kind of like green fields to play with and to try to make this work in. And I'm really focused on trying to serve players the best that I can. And I mean, I guess this is my upcoming topic, but trying to find ways to surprise and delight players. Now, where to draw the line in terms of like, should a component be included or not? I probably included more in this game than like I needed to. Those.
You definitely did.
Yes.
You were. It's very consumer friendly. Your approach to this game, right there.
Yeah, and part of my calculus there is trying to learn as much as possible in the time that I have, because as an independent creator, I may only be able to put out one game every 2 years, or hopefully at some point one game every year. And if I'm trying to learn from one release and apply those learnings to a release that'll take 2 years to get out there, then my pace of learning it can only be so fast. I think by putting more hooks in than I needed to, I have been able to learn a lot faster about like what has resonated with different types of players and what hasn't. And that will allow me to hopefully take those learnings and apply them to my next release in a way that's like a bit more targeted to try to deliver, let's say like 90% of the experience with only like 50% of the all of the work that went into delivering that experience the first time around.
That makes a lot of sense. One last question before we move on to the next topic is there then one thing, now that you've gone through it, now that you've created the game, you put it out there, you've been selling it, is there one thing maybe you would have changed from, not necessarily from a design perspective, but like getting in, like the manufacturing or some of the components or anything like that? That's like, I've learned this lesson, and maybe if I were to do this again, I wouldn't have done it this way.
Yeah, I think taking the learnings that I have now, I would have done one of two things, both centered around the player boards themselves and that spring-loaded mechanism. Now, that for me was never something that I communicated as necessary to gameplay. It was always just a whimsical representation of you doing, your in this game, your god kind of like transforming their energy, right? And I think I would have done one of two things. I would have either had better messaging around that to make it really clear to players that like, you do not need this. And even if your game has it, you don't even need to use it. You can just use the really nice smooth rail system. You don't need to eject the token. Some people really like that. There are certain gamers in my group who will be like they really love it. And it kind of helps them approach a heavier game like this and enjoy it on their level. But for some people, and I totally understand this, they're like, this is the most unnecessary thing that a game could have. And I totally respect that. I think I could have done a better job just messaging that like, no one needs this. Like, you don't have to get it. I tried to do that to an extent, but I think I could have been clearer in that. I still am proud of it because I still think that I sold the game for like something that like I don't think I gouged anyone on those things. So I don't.
I think the funniest thing for me, because I read the rules, and it literally says in the rule book that like you'll get the hang of the spring-loaded thing by the end of the first game, probably.
We've only touched it. We've only played it 2 players, and then tomorrow we actually have it set up on our other table out there for 4 players for a game tomorrow night. I was like, okay, we're going to show this to some friends now that we understand that we've gotten kind of used to the flow. And then I can't wait because usually Christina and I are sitting next to each other so we can look at the board from the same direction. Now I'm going to have someone sitting across from me. So at some point, I'm definitely going to be shooting these tiles, the little plastic tiles at them. I'm going to like pull back that spring as hard as I can and just seeing if I could even like hit their side at all.
It's unnecessary shoe.
Well, if you need a stress release valve, it's there for you.
Yeah.
So I either would have improved the communication around that, or I just would have gotten rid of them entirely and said, like, you know what, this is one, I'll keep the nice metal rail system, but like that whimsical feature, I'll kill that, and we probably don't need it. So I'm not sure which would have been better, but I think one of those two things I would have done.
Mm.
Do you feel like you had like a bit of a head start and inside knowledge from all those years working on the manufacturing side too? Like you had like a leg up on certain things on how you wanted to communicate what you wanted from the game design on the manufacturing side and everything.
Yes, I definitely did. And having worked at a company called Panda Game Manufacturing for so long, which I think is one of the industry's premier manufacturers.
Oh, for sure.
I had some pretty good support there because I'd worked with their production team in China for so long, and we know each other personally, and we've spent a lot of time together over the years, and we know how to communicate pretty well. So just being able to communicate what's important, what's not, and have them kind of do all the due diligence that's necessary to do new things in manufacturing, which is always a risk. I think that definitely was an advantage that made it easier than it would have been not
super
having.
Polished this time.
Yeah.
I do want to, of course, talk about your topic too. So can you remind us of what your topic was?
Yeah, my topic is how games can surprise and delight us. And I picked this topic because it's something that is really meaningful to me in games. And, I think I fell short in a couple ways, but it's something that was always a North Star for me in creating An Age Contrived. And it will be a North Star in creating new games that I work on. So it's just something that really interests me about games is how they can find ways to surprise and delight. I first got that idea planted in my head by someone at Riot Games, the video game studio most known for League of Legends. And it was working with a producer named Chris Cantrell there on a board game that Riot made called Mechs vs. Minions, where that was their North Star in terms of the production of that game in any case. How do we make this game in a way that will serve players as well as possibly, but also give them something that they just would not expect? And I think that they managed to do that in the components of that game, in the storage of that game. I think Mechs vs. Minions is still to this day, even I think 8 years after release, viewed as a shining star of like how a game can be presented and stored. I guess there's some spoilers in there, so I won't get too much into the details, but it's just they managed to create a ceremony with how players unbox and set up that game, and then the gameplay is fantastic as well. So that's where the idea first got planted. And then it became something that I started looking for in games, and then started noticing more actively. Whereas beforehand, I just kind of, experienced games as I did, but I started paying more attention to it. So I listed a few games that managed to surprise and delight me, but I also wanted to ask the two of you if there are any that come to mind that are just for whatever reason, and could be anything, just surprising, delighting, make you happy in one way or another.
I mean, we know Shu was surprised and delighted by An Age Contrived. We heard that earlier, for sure. But yeah, I think there's so many little ways that can happen, both on like a physical scale, where maybe like I am definitely the type of person when it's like a cool component, I'll be like, oh my gosh, this berry is squishy. Or like when the art is really, really great, and like I'm going to be like just in awe over it for the whole game, on that sort of very physical, sort of visual, tangible side. But I think I also really appreciate when a game has these little touches, or there's something that just makes it bigger than the sum of its parts, where like I read the rules, I'm like, okay, sure, that sounds interesting. But when you get to playing it, there's something about how a person interacts with it and how the players interact that make it reach that other level, and that surprises me. So I think those are sort of the main things that come to mind. Very recently, I think we talked about the gang a bunch from this most recent Gen Con. It was sort of a very popular game about cooperative poker, and I think both Shu and I, when we first heard about the game, had it demoed a little bit. We're like, okay, that sounds sort of cool. But then when you actually start playing it with real people, there's this extra layer of people just getting really into it. It has this really easy hook of being poker, which is fairly familiar, but then now you're approaching it in a very different way because you're working together rather than trying to read each other to defeat each other. You're reading each other to see how you can win together. So I think those sorts of surprises are interesting when I get more from the game than I expected just from reading the rules, because I'm usually the one reading the rules. So that came to mind as a recent one. What about you, Shu?
The one you mentioned before, Chris, Zokin, is definitely one. Like when you set that up and you kind of see just the board is mainly covered by these plastic gears that are all interlocking, and they all have different little actions and steps on them. That's really impressive to see. One recently that we kind of went gaga over is Bezier Games released the colossal version of Cat in a Box. And then this is a trick-taking game, except that there are no suits. You kind of define the suits as you play for each game. So trick-taking, like if you think of games like Hearts or Euchre, but much better. This is a fantastic game. And then the Colossal Edition came with oversized tokens. So everyone has these cute little sort of clear plastic tokens that you place. But one of the coolest things is the cat from the Cat in a Box. Like you see this really cute black and white cat on the box, on the cover. They have a big plastic figurine that they fit into this box for a first player marker. Very unnecessary, but it is awfully cute. Like people just kind of go gaga over it. And it's only overshadowed because we also bought the plushie that's about 10 inches long, and it's a bigger version of this cat, but soft. And so we also break that out and it's so cute. Like when we went to go back this, I asked Christina, I'm like, should we get the plushie? She's like, no, we don't need this. And I backed it.
I was trying to display some restraint.
Yeah, she's trying to save money. I backed it anyways because I knew exactly what was going to happen. And so when it came, I showed it to her. She didn't even say anything. She just like extended her arms out, eyes open, like, oh, like give me that thing. And then she just like hugged it and was just snuggling it. I'm like, see, I knew that was worth whatever we like $10-20 we paid for it. Then the party game Wavelength. That I don't. Have you played Wavelength?
I have.
Before?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's a cool one where the basic idea is there's two teams, and then someone has a prompt of like hot versus cold or dangerous versus safe, and then
sexy versus unsexy Pokemon.
Yeah, that's a real card from the game. So then you have this wheel that sort of displays a sort of semicircle range, and then the person who's kind of giving the clue will have this hidden from the rest of the group. They'll spin it around, and then it will show you somewhere in this range from one end of the spectrum to the other in this little kind of semicircle. And there'll be something that's kind of like this wedge that shows you're trying to get your team to guess within this range. So it might be all the way hot, all the way cold, somewhere in between. And then you close this so now they can't see it. Then you tell the team something like maybe you might say a stovetop or an ice cooler or a refrigerator or something like that, right? Then they will turn around and they'll point another arrow to try to guess it. In any case, then you reveal it to see if they were close or not to what the actual hidden target is. But this mechanism is so nice because there's this little wheel that's sitting on the box, they turn the box into sort of the base for this wheel. It's all very solid plastic. The reveal is really fun. They spent a lot of money just to design this properly to make this
the color scheme is great too.
Yeah, it's like the central, really cool looking piece that's at the center of the table that everyone's staring at, everyone's looking at, everyone's excited to see, and it's just very rewarding. And it functionally works really well for what the gameplay is. So that's really cool. And then a couple more quick shout outs. All Play, I feel like they've been doing a really good job lately too of making these small box games that are pretty cheap. They're like $20 games or so. But then you can also, for people like us who maybe if you want to upgrade a game, then you could buy an upgrade pack. And I've seen this for a lot of their games. I'm not sure they do it for all of their games, but a lot of these small box games come with an optional upgrade pack that you could buy at conventions or such. So, like, for example, the trick-taking game, there's a team trick-taking game called Lunar. You can also buy an extra metal coins pack. So then you have metal coins that represent everything that are huge and chunky and very rewarding to play with. They have a game called Couture. And then it's about high fashion, the world of high fashion, and you're collecting sets of cards and such. But there's an upgrade set where you have these really nice, I don't remember if they're wooden or just really thick cardboard. Yeah, like magazine covers that have spot gloss on them and things like that, and some 3D kind of three-dimensional pieces, and it just makes the game look that much better. It's already a good-looking game, but in fact, you can buy these upgrade pieces. But what's nice is that they're optional. Like if you don't want them, you could just buy the base game and play the cheaper version if you want. So I think that's kind of cool what they're doing at All Play.
Yeah. Shu, you touched on a lot of awesome component examples there, and Christina, you touched on gameplay kind of being being more than the sum of its parts after reading the rules. I think the one other thing I'd mention is just a really awesome thematic integration.
Yes.
Like Christina, you and I had the chance to play Sky Team 2 Gen Cons ago.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And that was one that surprised and delighted me just based on, like it's a game where it's a cooperative game where one of us plays the pilot and the other plays the co-pilot, and we are trying to land a plane in difficult conditions. And I had never considered such a theme for a board game before. That I think that was the first to kind of tackle that sort of setting. And then just playing it and feeling like, wow, I really feel like we're in this tense situation trying to land this plane, and we're doing all of the things that pilots would do in that situation. Of course, in an abstracted way, but it felt tense and it felt like we were doing that. And that the fact that it got that feeling across to us as the players in a really short rule set and a simple game was just really surprising and delighting to me. I loved it.
I think that narrative part, the thematic part, is really always catches me too. Like thinking about some of my favorite games. I really love Obsession, which is sort of like this Georgian Regency era sort of game about managing an estate, right? And you have to host these events in this sort of way, but also manage your servants because, of course, I'm not I want to make sure that they have rest and things like that. And then all of the cards of the guests that you're inviting, they all have little flavor text that you can choose to read or not, but it just all fits really, really well together. So all these little touches, I think, just really make a game sing and makes you want to play it again. Like more recently, I talked about Rock Hard 1977 also from Gen Con, and I thought that the thematic elements to that game were like so good. It made me feel like I'm trying to make it as a rock star in the 70s. Like, how long can I hold on to this job? Do I just ditch this job? But I need some money, to make my demo tape, do I fall, into a world of getting addicted to drugs? I mean, candy, like things like that. But all of those things actually made sense in this, in the way that you played the game too. So I really, those are the things that stick with me, I think, when they surprise and delight me. So, yeah.
I'm glad you brought this up, Chris, because I'm going to bring up a game that we've talked about a lot on the show, this series, this franchise. And then I'm not even going to talk much about it here because we have plans to cover it more deeply later. The evolution /ocean/nature series from North Star. Originally it was Evolution. Their sequel was Oceans, which takes place in the oceans. And then Nature is sort of their upcoming redo of the Evolution system. And real quick, it's thematically, I get so excited and happy about this. I'm actually kind of sick of nature games in general. There's been so many plant and animal games in the last couple of years.
To have, but
There's
anyway,
so many.
Okay.
But this one is about evolution, right? And it's about creating these species where and you have to sort of react to what's happening in the game. So depending on what the group does, your species might change. So for example, in the game of Nature, we have an early copy of Nature. I went Predator. I decided to create one of my species. We all started as herbivores, and then I became a carnivore, and then therefore I was starting to eat other players' species, right? And then that's going to cost them points. But then they had to develop defenses fast, and then all of a sudden it's like you can see this kind of the light bulbs going off in your other players' faces of playing it for the first time, and our friends sort of like, oh, that's really cool, because it's like, hey, if you play fast, my species cannot catch you unless I'm as fast or faster. It makes perfect sense. It's thematic, and it's just like, okay, whatever creature you're imagining, I'm now a lion or a cheetah. But if I'm a predator and I'm slower than everyone else at the table, I'm not eating, right? And then some of you all were playing where they were developing it in a way. I forgot what they did exactly, but they made it so I had no choice but to eat some of my other own species. And they're all giggling and laughing that this thing backfired on me. And then so I was like, I still have to eat, and now I'm eating some of my own other species now, and which is reducing my score. And so there's just all these fun stories, because thematically that game just makes so much sense. It just, you understand why things are happening. You understand what cards are doing what, and why you're evolving. But again, we'll talk more about this game later. It's just such a cool system that from a thematic point of view, for sure.
Awesome.
Any other standouts that you feel like you missed on that?
Well, I think for me, there's also this concept of dramatic moments that can really go a long way to surprising and delighting players. And I think there's a few games that have done these really well in the past few years. One is this game called Thunder Road Vendetta, which whenever my friends ask me what that is, I just tell them it's a death race. We're racing, and we race until everyone dies but one player, or one player crosses the finish line. It's a death race, and it's got this awesome slam mechanic where when two cars collide by entering the same space, you roll a couple dice, and those dice determine which car is going to move to an adjacent space, whether it's the bottom one or the top one in a slam, and in which space they move into. And this can be really impactful, because if you move into a cliff space, for example, or if you move off the board, then you're just dead. That car is dead. And the larger of the two cars in the slam can elect to re-roll the dice. So it's like a calculated decision. Like, am I moving my large car onto a smaller car, or are there going to be two cars of the same size that ram into each other? And as a game designer, someone could look at this and say, like, well, there's a lot of randomness here. You make a decision, then you roll some dice, and you just see what happens. But this game, that's exactly what that is. Like, that is the soul of this game, and it's very intentional, and it wears that on its sleeve and really leans into it, and that creates like these amazing moments that I think like they constantly delight myself and my friends around the table. And then there's a couple more that I'll just list off quickly. Two games that do bag building and drawing from a bag in great ways, being Quacks of Quedlinburg and Wonderland's War, that I continue to play a lot of, where you've got a bag in each of these games. They're very different games, but in each one you've got a bag of chips, and you are upgrading that bag of chips throughout the game. And then there are certain phases where you draw chips from the bag and you see what happens. And the games are both structured such that it can be really dramatic. Like, I'm drawing one thing, and Christina, you're drawing another, and like, I really need to draw a certain chip, and I've got a certain probability that I know and you know, and we're kind of like playing head to head in that way. And the other players at the table may also have some stakes in it. So in Wonderland's War, for example, like Shu, you may have placed a bet on who's going to come out ahead in this battle, Christina or myself.
You should always bet on me.
I wouldn't bet against you. So that thing, like that sort of, those sorts of mechanics, I think, can really surprise and delight players time and time again.
Definitely the luck aspect can be so fun, and the pusher luck. Like, I remember specifically egging on James Hudson, who is the publisher of Wonderland's War and to help develop the game, egging him to keep drawing when in a battle against me, and then he busted, and it was like the best feeling in the world for several months. So it was great.
You clung on to that little feeling.
It was fun. And I guess that's why, we can continue to play all of these games, because that's what we're looking for. We want to be surprised and delighted, and in different ways. So, we have a lot more games to talk about coming up too. But thanks so much for joining us today, Chris. We're excited to see the expansion that's coming up and what else that Bellows Intent is going to be coming up with in the future. So where can people follow you and Bellows Intent?
I think the best place is simply bellowsintent.com, where if anyone is interested in seeing how we're trying to serve players a little bit differently, then you can just sign up for emails there. And I try to send an email every month or two and keep it reasonable.
Cool. We hope everybody enjoyed listening to our show. Thanks to our extraordinary editor, Mike Zipkin. And don't forget to check out our trivia show, the Board Game Quiz Show, on YouTube and Facebook. We are in season 5 still. It's ongoing. It's been a crazy hard content creator season. So you can see how you stack up. Now you can stop listening and go play a game. Bye.
Bye.